Ace Attorney. The classic 2001 visual novel created by Capcom where you take the role of defense attorney Phoenix Wright, who does amazing legal feats such as cross-examine a parrot, contact his dead mentor's ghost through her little sister, and use a weird magic rock to see locks that only he can see that tell him when someone is lying. Yes, this is a courtroom drama series. Ace Attorney was created by Shu Takumi to be an easy, fun mystery game. In nearly every case Phoenix Wright takes, his client is actually innocent, and it's only through the court trial that the true killer is revealed. But what happens to those killers? At the end of each trial, you celebrate with your friends and now off-the-hook client, but we never see what happens to the actual culprit. In many fan works, people assume that the murderer is automatically put onto death row. But how would their punishment actually play out? And because I have endless curiosity and absolutely no self-control, that's what we're going to find out here today. Now, I doubt Mr. Takumi ever intended for his game to be completely accurate, not to mention that at its core, Ace Attorney is a Japanese game series. But Janet Shu, one of the official translators for the Ace Attorney localization team, said in a blog post, quote, "When I took over the series localization direction starting with the second game, one of the first things I had to deal with was what to do with Maya's hometown and all the mysticism surrounding the Fae clan. It was then that I created a little headcanon for myself, which I suppose is actually real canon now for the localized versions. While Gyakuten Saiban takes place in Japan, the Los Angeles that Ace Attorney takes place in is an alternate universe where anti-Japanese sentiments and anti-immigrant laws were not enacted, and Japanese culture was allowed to flourish and blend into the local culture in the same manner as other immigrant cultures." End quote. Taking that into account, let's work under the assumption that Ace Attorney does take place in Los Angeles, California, and that all lawyers and judges work with the American Constitution and the California state law. Also, while there are 6 games in the main Ace Attorney series, in this video we're just going to focus on the first game, Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney, and the 5 cases from the DS version of the game. So get your attorney's badges and let's dive in. Each state in the United States has its own constitution that specifies how the state will work legally. A state's constitution has laws for just about everything, but what we want to focus on with Ace Attorney is the California State Penal Code, which is a fancy way of saying criminal law. The California State Penal Code, which can be found online, defines 4 separate forms of homicide, and since every case is a murder case in Ace Attorney, it's a good place to start. The first types of homicide are known as manslaughter. That's accidental killing. There are 3 forms of manslaughter: voluntary and involuntary, and vehicular. Voluntary manslaughter, as defined in Penal Code Section 192 subsection A, is the unlawful killing of a person upon a sudden quarrel or heat of passion. So, like when a guy walks in on his wife cheating with another man and he kills the other man. Involuntary manslaughter, as defined in Section 192 subsection B, is the unlawful killing of a person during the commission of a lawful manner without due process or caution. That's like if you bought drugs and gave them to someone and they died of an overdose. You could be tried for involuntary manslaughter. Vehicular manslaughter is when unlawful driving, speeding, drunk driving, stuff like that, results in someone's death. Ace Attorney doesn't really deal with vehicular death, so we're not going to really worry about that one. The other forms of homicide in California are forms of murder, intentional killing. They are first-degree murder and second-degree murder. First-degree murder, as defined by Penal Code Section 189 subsection A, is, and get ready for this because this is a doozy of a definition, quote, "All murder that is perpetrated by means of a destructive device or explosive, a weapon of mass destruction, knowing use of ammunition designed primarily to penetrate metal or armor, poison, lying in wait, torture, or by any other kind of willful, deliberate, and premeditated killing, or that is committed in the perpetration of or attempt to perpetrate arson, rape, carjacking, robbery, burglary, mayhem, kidnapping, train wrecking, and so forth." So, murder that you planned beforehand. Second-degree murder, on the other hand, is defined by Penal Code Section 189 subsection B as quote, "All other kinds of murder not covered by subsection A are murders of the second degree," end quote. So literally any other murder that isn't a first-degree murder. Each form of homicide has a slightly different punishment, too. Voluntary manslaughter is punishable with imprisonment of 3, 6, or 11 years in state prison, according to Penal Code Section 193, subsection A. People guilty of involuntary manslaughter face 2, 3, or 4 years in jail or prison, according to Section 193, subsection B. First-degree murderers, on the other hand, as stated in Penal Code Section 190, subsection A, shall be punished by death, imprisonment in the state prison for life without the possibility of parole, or imprisonment in the state prison for a term of 25 years to life. In the same subsection, second-degree murderers are punished with 15 years to life in state prison, supposing they don't qualify for some select variables. Now, you may have noticed that a lot of those punishments can vary for each crime, and that's because it's the judge that has the final say in how long someone goes to prison or jail. The only exception is certain death penalty cases, in which case the jury gets more of a say, but Ace Attorney doesn't have a jury, so who cares about that? But because of the number of ways a sentence can go, the most we can do for each of our Ace Attorney villains is give a max punishment and a minimum punishment based on their crimes. Now that we've got the most common crimes defined, let's look into the cases and killers themselves. In the first ever Ace Attorney case, Phoenix Wright is defending his childhood friend, Larry Butts, of the murder of Butts' ex-girlfriend, Cindy Stone. The actual killer, we find out, is Mr. Frank Sott. Yes, these are the kinds of names we deal with in Ace Attorney. Mr. Sott accidentally killed Miss Stone as he was trying to steal from her home when the victim came home earlier than he had anticipated. He then beat her to death with a small stone statue. Death would normally mean some form of manslaughter. But Sott killed Stone while he was attempting to steal from her home, and in his testimonies, he admits he's a burglar. Now, if you'll remember part of Penal Code Section 189, subsection A, one of the qualifiers for first-degree murder is murder perpetrated while committing another crime. Some of those crimes are burglary and robbery. So, Frank Sott is guilty of murder in the first degree. I'm also going to tack on Sott's other crimes that don't necessarily involve the Stone case, since he admits to being a serial burglar and thief. Burglary is defined by the state of California in Penal Code Section 459 as the breaking and entering of any building or ship or vehicle with the intent to steal. Furthermore, Sott is guilty of burglary of the first degree, which is the burglary of any inhabited dwelling house as defined in Section 460, subsection A. First-degree burglary is punishable with imprisonment in state prison for 2, 4, or 6 years, as mentioned in Section 461, subsection A. Additionally, Sott commits petty theft, which is the felonious stealing of another person's personal property. Petty theft is punishable by a fine no bigger than $1,000 US and/or imprisonment in county jail for 6 months, as stated in Section 490. So, Frank Sott is guilty of first-degree murder, burglary, petty theft, and of course, perjury. Taking all of this into account, his maximum punishment would be the death penalty or life in prison. Personally, I think the latter is more likely since this is only his first violent crime. Ignoring the life sentence, his max time would include 25 years for the first-degree murder, 4 years for perjury, 6 years for first-degree burglary, and 6 months in county jail for petty theft. So the total would be somewhere around 35 years and 6 months in prison. His minimum prison sentence, on the other hand, is 25 years for first-degree murder, 2 years for perjury, 2 years for burglary, and 6 months for petty theft, which is something like 29 years and 6 months in prison with or without the $1,000 fine. Frank Sott is no doubt a sleazebag, but there are definitely some other Ace Attorney villains here who are worse than this burglar. In Phoenix Wright's second case, he must solve the mystery of the death of his mentor, Mia Fey, all while defending her little sister, Maya, from the murder charges. Through the trial, we learned that the real murderer is one Mr. Red White of Blue Corps, along with some assistance from his secretary, April May. 15 years ago, a case known as the DL6 incident used a medium, Misty Faye, to try and find a murderer. The medium failed and her identity was leaked to the press, and Misty Faye fled, leaving behind her two daughters, Maya and Mia. Before her death, Mia Faye had been looking into the DL6 incident to figure out who had leaked her mother's identity. She discovered that it was Red White who leaked the information, and she began investigating him. White found out, and with May's assistance, wiretapped Faye's office, and when he was sure that Faye was planning to put him behind bars, murdered her, leaving behind a bloody note with Maya Faye's names on it to implement her in the crime. Starting with White, he is clearly guilty of first-degree murder, as this was a premeditated attack and he was lying in wait at Mia Faye's office to kill her. But more notable is White's frequent crime of extortion. Extortion, as defined in the California State Penal Code, Section 518, subsection A, is the obtaining of property or other consideration from another with his or her consent induced by a wrongful use of force or fear. Section 519 then defines fear as a threat of harm to a person or their loved ones, exposing someone of a crime, exposing a secret, and things along those lines. White admits that he frequently blackmailed others so that he could obtain his wealth and more information to blackmail more people. He even claims to have city judges and prosecutors under his thumb. Extortion, as mentioned in Section 520, is punishable with 2, 3, or 4 years in state prison. White also wiretapped Mia Faye's office, meaning he is guilty of invasion of privacy. Penal Code Section 632, subsection A, states that those guilty of invasion of privacy can be punished with fines of up to $2,500 per violation, and/or up to 1 year in county jail or state prison. Let's move on to his accomplice, April May. May would probably get a lighter sentence of all charges considering she was being extorted by White to do his dirty work. Despite this, she did still help White wiretap Faye's office, so she is guilty of the same invasion of privacy charges. Additionally, both May and White lied on stand and presumably under oath, meaning they are both guilty of perjury. So, White's maximum punishment would be either the death penalty or life in prison. If we were to ignore that punishment, however, White would have to serve at least 25 years in state prison for first-degree murder. For extortion, he would serve a max of 4 years in prison, and for invasion of privacy, 1 year. For perjury, he could get up to 4 years in prison, bringing Red White's total max punishment to around 34 or more years in state prison. His minimum sentence would be 25 years for first-degree murder, 2 years for extortion, 1 year for invasion of privacy, and 2 years for perjury, bringing his total minimum sentence to around 30 years in prison, with or without the $2,500 fine. As for May, she's only guilty of invasion of privacy and perjury. For her maximum sentence, she would serve 1 year for invasion of privacy and 4 years for perjury, for a total of 5 years in state prison. For her minimum punishment, she would serve the 1 year for invasion of privacy and 2 years for perjury, bringing her total to 3 years with or without the $2,500 fine. Turnabout Sisters is one of the most influential cases in Ace Attorney, so it's no surprise that its main villain, Red White, gets a harsher sentence than petty criminals like Frank Sawit. But there are, of course, more villains to convict. In Ace Attorney's third case, Phoenix Wright is defending children's actor Will Powers as he's accused of the murder of fellow actor Jack Hammer. The actual perpetrator is Dee Vasquez, the producer of the show Hammer and Powers star in. Turnabout Samurai is unique in the sense that Vasquez didn't really murder Hammer. In fact, Hammer had attacked Vasquez with the intent of killing her as revenge for 5 years of blackmail from Vasquez. You see, 5 years ago there was an accident in which rising star Jack Hammer accidentally shoved and killed a fellow actor. Dee Vasquez covered the accident up, but she held the killing over Hammer's head for the next 5 years to get him to do whatever she wanted. Hammer dressed in Will Powers' costume to try and shove the blame on him and made his way towards Vasquez. However, when Hammer tried to kill Vasquez, she shoved him back and he fell onto a garden post, stabbing and killing him. Now, this is another accidental death, and one of self-defense at that, so under normal circumstances, Dee Vasquez probably wouldn't have been charged with much of anything. The problem started when Vasquez tried to cover up the incident herself. She threw the ruined costume into a furnace and moved Hammer's body, and she had help too from one of her showrunners, Sal Manella. Under California State Penal Code Section 152, subsection B, subsection 2, those who knowingly conceal an accidental death are guilty of a misdemeanor. Both Manella and Vasquez are guilty of this, and the punishment for concealing an accidental death is up to 1 year in county jail and/or fines from $1,000 to $10,000. Additionally, both lied on the stand, so both are guilty of perjury. I mentioned before too that D. Vasquez had been blackmailing Jack Hammer. Though it was for different reasons, Vasquez is guilty of extortion just like Red White. So D. Vasquez is guilty of concealing an accidental death, which leads to 1 year in county jail, perjury with a max of 4 years in state prison, and extortion for up to 4 years. So Vasquez's max punishment is around 9 years in jail or prison with an added $10,000 in fines. Her minimum, however, would include 2 years for perjury and 2 years for extortion, leading to 5 years in jail or prison with a $1,000 fine. Manella, on the other hand, is only guilty of concealing an accidental death and perjury, so his max punishment would only be 5 years in jail or prison along with a $10,000 fine, and a minimum punishment of 3 years with a $1,000 fine. Honestly, the villains in Turnabout Samurai are probably the least nefarious out of the lot in the first game, but even still, they'll be serving some hard time for their crimes. Turnabout Goodbyes. Arguably the most infamous case in all of Ace Attorney. It is, of course, the case of interrogating a parrot and unnecessary feelings. In this case, Phoenix Wright is defending prosecutor Miles Edgeworth, who had been Wright's enemy up until this point in the game. Edgeworth is accused of killing former defense attorney Robert Hammond. Now, if you'll remember from Case 2, 15 years ago there was a court case that became known as the DL6 incident. Mystic Misty Fey was hired to speak with the spirit of the victim of the case, but in the end no killer was prosecuted. Well, the victim in the DL6 incident was none other than defense attorney Gregory Edgeworth, Miles Edgeworth's father. In the Los Angeles of Ace Attorney, there's a 15-year statute of limitations on all court cases. If the murder of Gregory Edgeworth isn't solved by December 28th, no one will ever go to jail for the crime. Oh, and the trial of Miles Edgeworth begins on the 26th. However, in actual US law, there is no statute of limitations on murder cases, so if this case took place in real life, it wouldn't be nearly as high stakes. The victim of Turnabout Goodbyes, Robert Hammond, was the defense attorney of the accused in the DL6 incident, who was Yanni Yogi, who was a court bailiff at the time of the incident. It was Yogi who was accused by the spirit of Gregory Edgeworth, but ultimately Yogi was let off of all charges. But he did lose his job and was outcast for the next 15 years. It was Yanni Yogi who shot and killed Robert Hammond and framed Edgeworth, but it wasn't his idea. He received a letter at his home that detailed how and what he should do. So while Yanni Yogi is guilty of perjury and first-degree murder, he isn't the mastermind behind this killing. The trial takes a turn when, just when he's about to get a not guilty verdict, Edgeworth declares that he's guilty of a different crime, the DL6 incident, the murder of his father. Through some trial and error, it's revealed that the real killer behind the DL6 incident is prosecutor Manfred von Karma, who has been prosecuting the Hammond case. Not only that, but it's von Karma who sent the letter to Yogi detailing how he should kill Hammond. 15 years ago, after his perfect win record was ruined by his defeat at the hands of Gregory Edgeworth, Manfred von Karma saw his chance at revenge. There had been an earthquake that day, and the power in the courthouse went out, trapping Yanni Yogi, Gregory, and young Miles Edgeworth in the elevator. Through a small opening in the elevator, von Karma shot Gregory Edgeworth and fled the scene, and he got away with the crime for nearly 15 years. So, not only is Manfred von Karma guilty of the murder of Gregory Edgeworth, but he's also guilty of the murder of Robert Hammond. Under California State Penal Code Section 3.1, von Karma has been considered to aid and abet Yanni Yogi in the murder of Robert Hammond. Unlike most Ace Attorney villains, von Karma never took the stand, so he's not guilty of perjury. He's only guilty of the 2 counts of first-degree murder. So, going back to Yanni Yogi, who is guilty of 1 count of first-degree murder and perjury. His maximum sentence would again be either the death penalty or life in prison without parole. If he were to get neither of those, however, he would serve at least 25 years for the murder and up to 4 years for perjury, for a max sentence of 29 years. His minimum sentence, on the other hand, would be 27 years. Manfred von Karma, meanwhile, is guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. It's also implied that he's forged evidence and prepared evidence in the past, but we don't have any concrete evidence for that. However, there is a point that Von Karma goes so far as to taser both Phoenix Wright and Maya Fey, so that could be considered 2 counts of assault as well. Taking all of that into account, Von Karma's maximum punishment would be either the death penalty or life in prison. Assuming that he gets neither of those and that the judge doesn't stack his sentences, Manfred Von Karma's maximum sentence is 25 years to life for the first-degree murder, plus 6 months for assault. Incidentally, that's his minimum sentence too. But really, let's face it, Manfred Von Karma is an old man, so he probably won't make a 25-year sentence anyways. In my opinion, Manfred Von Karma is the worst villain on this list, and Yanni Yogi perhaps the most pathetic. There is, however, one final case, and its villain might even rival Von Karma. This final case is exclusive to the DS re-release of Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. In it, Wright is defending prosecutor Lana Skye at the behest of her younger sister, Emma Skye. Lana Skye is being tried for the murder of Bruce Goodman, and for once, Wright's client isn't entirely innocent. For this case to make sense, we have to go over what led up to it. 2 years ago, the police department caught a killer but didn't have enough evidence to convict him. While he was in questioning at the station, a power outage allowed the killer to escape from the room, after which he made his way to the joint office of Lana Skye and Damon Gant. Emma Skye happened to be waiting there for her sister. The killer was about to make the girl his next victim, when prosecutor Neil Marshall happened upon the room. Emma fainted from shock while Marshall and the killer grappled. When Emma awoke, she saw 2 figures fighting, one with a knife. Assuming that the one with the knife was the killer, Emma shoved both of them, knocking them both unconscious. Emma again fainted. Damon Gant entered his office, saw the scene, and saw an opportunity to ensure that the killer would be convicted. He moved Marshall's unconscious body, stabbing him upon the sword of a suit of armor. Lana Skye arrived shortly after, and fearing that her sister had accidentally killed Neil Marshall, begged Gant to. Gant did, and from that point on, he had Lana Skye under his thumb. For the conviction of the killer, Gant was promoted to Chief of Police and Skye to Chief Prosecutor. For the next 2 years, Skye would do whatever Gant asked, mostly forging evidence. Including, however, hiding the body of Bruce Goodman, who Gant had killed to prevent from finding the truth of 2 years ago. So, while Lana Skye did not kill Bruce Goodman, she did move his body and tamper with evidence. Lana Skye, then, is guilty of perjury and evidence tampering. According to Penal Code Section 149, subsection A, evidence tampering is a misdemeanor, resulting in a punishment of up to 6 months in county jail and a fine of up to $1,000. As a prosecutor, her punishment is somewhat different. Penal Code Section 149, subsection C, states that prosecuting attorneys who intentionally and in bad faith alter, modify, or withhold any physical matter, digital image, video recording, or relevant exculpatory material or information, knowing that it is relevant and material to the outcome of the case, is guilty of a felony punishable by 16 months, 4 or 6 years in state prison. As a result, Lana Skye's maximum punishment would be 6 years for evidence tampering plus 4 years for perjury, for a total of 10 years in state prison. Her minimum sentence, likewise, would be 16 months for evidence tampering and 2 years for perjury, for a total of a little over 3 years. Murder, as well as extorting Lana Skye, and perjury. Also, because he was the one who had Skye tamper with evidence, I'd say he's also guilty of evidence tampering. For first-degree murder, he'll get the death penalty or life in prison without parole, or 25 years to life in prison. For extortion, he'd get 2, 3, or 4 years in prison, and for perjury, he'd get 2, 3, or 4 years. Evidence tampering are slightly different. According to Penal Code Section 149, subsection B, because he is a peace officer, Gant would be punished with 2, 3, or 5 years in prison. Taking all of that into account and ignoring the death penalty and life in prison sentences, Damon Gant's maximum sentence would be somewhere around 38 years in prison, while his minimum sentence would be around 31 years. For the first time, Phoenix Wright's client is not completely innocent, but nor is she completely guilty either. Emma Skye makes appearances in later installments in the series, and it's clear that after the 10-year time skip between the first and second trilogy, Lana Skye could make an appearance too. Ace Attorney should by no means be taken as an accurate depiction of the court system, much less the American court system. But if the creative team behind the series ever takes the chance to look at the actual punishments their villains face, they might be able to bring back some classic villains in newer games for some added fun. Thanks for watching all of this. I hope you enjoyed all of my hard work, and if you see any problems with what I've said, be sure to leave a comment down below. Also, I'm going to be leaving links to the sources I used in the description, so if you're interested in legal things, be sure to check that out. Again, thanks for watching, and go, ace some attorneys or something.